Giant snake cryptids are some of the most fascinating in the entire world. The giant anacondas of South America have captivated people for decades. The 50-foot Congo snake photo has been the subject of years of debate and analysis. But giant snakes in North America are a relatively underdiscussed and underrated cryptid. There are actually an insane number of sightings of massive snakes in the US, Canada, and Central America. Here are just some of the bizarre encounters people have had with them. In 1891, a railroad manager in Indiana named Higby came across some startled cattle, so he decided to investigate. He walked into a nearby ravine, where he came across a massive serpent coiled around a tree. It had some hair on its upper mouth and a white-colored throat. He estimated its total length to be about 50 feet or 15 meters. The snake then uncoiled itself and began traveling upwards, right to where Higby's employees were working. He was paralyzed in fear and unable to move or warn them. Luckily, the workers were fine, but several farm animals in the area disappeared. After the sighting, the workers refused to leave their homes without weapons. In 1914, a Louisiana man was paddling through Lake Pontchartrain when he saw a giant rainbow-colored snake. Rainbow snakes do live in Louisiana, but the snake this man saw was about 35 feet or 11 meters in length. The snake was blocking his path, so the man dipped his paddle in the water to change course. Turns out the snake was longer than he thought, as his paddle struck part of the snake that was lying underwater. The snake immediately jumped into the air and then began crawling into the man's boat. Luckily, it decided to not eat the man, and it slunk back into the water. Around 1947, two siblings were walking home from their bus stop in rural Texas near a lake. That's when they saw a giant log laying across the road. Crawling over the log was a massive snake, so long that it covered the entire road and then some. They immediately ran to their grandparents and told them to get their guns to shoot the serpent. Their grandparents were understandably skeptical, and they didn't see the snake themselves. While children often have overactive imaginations, the two kids did stick to their story, even decades later. While today Florida is known for giant invasive snakes, reports of massive serpents date back many years. Aviation pioneer and adventurer Hugh Willoughby became convinced of the existence of a large, undiscovered species of snake in southern Florida. In the late 1800s, there had been newspaper tales of men fighting giant 30-foot or 9-meter long snakes, but Willoughby thought these were obvious hoaxes. He heard more plausible stories from Seminole Native Americans, a group of people he deeply trusted. They told him about sightings of snakes over 18 feet or 6 meters long. Willoughby's friend Ed Brewer also shot a large and strange rattlesnake. He had been hunting in the Everglades when he came across the snake and fired at it. After hitting it, the smell was so overpowering that he was forced to leave. A year later, he and Willoughby came back and found some of the remains of the snake. Unlike normal rattlesnakes, this one had longitudinal stripes and strange bone formations. Willoughby thought these stripes and the terrible smell pointed towards it being a new species. On the other side of the United States, California has had multiple giant snake sightings. One occurred in 1874, when a massive 40-foot or 12-meter long red and black snake was seen. Eyewitnesses said that it had its mouth open, and they could see a forked tongue. When the animal began to move, it was slow and undulating up and down instead of moving side to side like some snakes do. The animal was apparently extremely heavy, as it crushed everything in its wake. One of California's most extensive giant snake sagas was nicknamed the Boss Snake. At first, people only saw the snake at a pretty far distance. Although the people who claimed to see it were reputable, they weren't close enough to make an accurate estimate of the snake's length. Then one day, it was seen in broad daylight in a field, which allowed witnesses to get a good look. The total length of the cryptid was estimated at almost 60 feet or 18 meters long, and it was as wide as a barrel. Some people said it moved side to side, others said it moved like a caterpillar. One man was waiting for a mining crew to arrive when he heard a loud screeching noise. Thinking it was the sound of their wagons, he moved towards it. But instead of wagons, he saw the body of a massive snake. It was all he could do to keep his horses from bolting off. Luckily, the snake moved away into some nearby brush, and both the man and his horses were okay. Another encounter with the boss snake came from a Frenchman named Rod. He was tracking a rabbit when he heard a loud sharp sound like a train whistle. Rod turned to look at the noise and was frozen in his tracks. Only a short distance away from him was a massive serpent. He called it the most hideously frightful monster that ever confronted mortal man. He also said it made his blood run as cold as Greenland ice. Rod was so scared that he was unable to shout to his nearby companion. The snake swayed back and forth watching him, occasionally flicking its tongue out. Rod said he would have fainted if he didn't realize it would have made him even easier prey. Although he couldn't move, he was able to get a good look at it. It had massive fangs, a brown body with orange spots on the back, and a dirty white underside. The serpent then began to uncoil, and Rod feared that it would strike him. Luckily, it only hissed and began to slowly move away through the forest. Rod tried to move, but his legs were so numb he fell face first into the ground. He then staggered away and found his partner. Shocked at Rod's appearance, his partner asked him what happened. Rod then pointed to the snake, which was distant but still visible from their location. They then watched it disappear underneath a cliff. The two noted that the snake was about as long as two particular trees were apart, so they went back and measured the distance between the trees and found it was 40 feet or 12 meters in length. In the mid-1800s, Triune, Tennessee was terrorized by a massive snake. The story starts around 1843, when a man saw a large snake passing through a road. It disappeared into some brush, but left a wide, heavy track behind. The track of the snake was seen again around 1853, and in 1858, another woman saw the snake itself. The snake wasn't sighted during the Civil War, but in 1868 it was spotted on a road by two people. At first, they thought some object was blocking the road, but then the snake began to move over a fence. The men quickly rode their horses to a safe distance on top of a hill, where they began to watch it. At times it stood still, but when they saw it attack a rabbit, it was lightning fast. They estimated its total size at 40 feet or 12 meters, and said it was a dirty black color. The men followed the animal until it made a strange bellowing cow-like noise and disappeared into a large hole on a rocky hill. The men swore the story was true in front of a judge, and locals began constructing a massive cage to trap the serpent. They placed it in front of the hole and also added some bait to entice the snake. Days went by with nothing happening. That's when one unfortunate man decided to walk in front of the cage and stick his face up to it. He saw two glowing red coals right in front of him, and immediately fell backwards down the hill. Luckily, he was alright with only some minor head injuries. Soon after, another man named Mr. Burke awoke early and decided to check the trap. To his horror, the snake had broken free, and was moving around in great agony. This caused Burke to faint. When Burke awoke and told the locals about what happened, they were all afraid of checking the trap. Eventually, one of them was brave enough to examine it. It had been absolutely smashed by the serpent, with the iron bars being snapped and found a great distance away from the cage. Two men decided to take guns into the woods and try to stop the animal. They eventually found it and fired at it, but the snake began moving towards them, so the men fled. After some time, another group became brave enough to go back to the spot where the snake was shot. The snake had died from its wounds, though nobody was willing to approach it until they fired several more shots at its body. They tried to move the body, but horses and donkeys fled in fear at the sight of it. They eventually decided to skin the snake and stuff it to prevent it from rotting. After a more precise measurement, they found it was 30 feet or 9 meters long. It was also said to have spots like a rattlesnake and a bright bluish underside. They also said it had an alligator-like ridge by the tail. The owners of the body planned to exhibit it around Tennessee and eventually show it to then-President Andrew Johnson. Unfortunately, the snake's body eventually disappeared. The snake itself caused a lot of excitement around the area. People flocked to the library to read books about snakes to see what species it could be. A protest of the governor used an image of the snake with the caption, "Governor Brownlow's brother from the Triune." One sensationalist newspaper reported that the snake was an agent of the Ku Klux Klan and had eaten 10 black people. A freeman who had been in the area for many years recalled that a boa constrictor had escaped from a circus about 30 years before. It wouldn't be until years later that the truth behind the story was uncovered. A doctor named William Clark was riding down the road with his wife on horseback when the horse stepped on a branch. His wife yelped and exclaimed that she thought it was a snake. This inspired him to come up with the entire story and send it to newspapers. What I found interesting is that people still reported seeing giant snake tracks despite the entire story being fake. That other newspaper also chimed in with fake details to take advantage of the cryptid's popularity. Another fun and less scary hoax occurred in New Hampshire back in 1826. A man had apparently found a bunch of strawberry plants on his land and didn't want his neighbors to go and steal them. So he told a fake giant snake story to the press in order to scare people away like a Scooby-Doo villain. One last funny hoax comes from Green Bay, Wisconsin back in the 1930s. There had apparently been multiple sightings of a giant python in the area. One fire department claimed to have captured the animal, but it turns out they just painted a fire hose to look like a snake. Another man also claimed to have caught the python, but that ended up being one he had shipped in via a train. A more modern sighting of a giant snake occurred in Moccasin Creek, South Dakota, back in 2001. Two kids were walking past a lake when, to their horror, a giant snake head popped out of the water. When the snake began swimming towards them, the kids ran away. Only a few days after their sighting, another person called the local police station to report a giant snake being seen. A local pet shop owner assured reporters that her Burmese pythons were safely inside her store and not responsible for the sightings. Large snakes have difficulty moving outside of the water, so it makes sense that some snake sightings would take place in or near lakes. In 1898, there were a number of sightings of a large snake near and on Kelly's Island. Kelly's Island is actually located entirely within Lake Erie of the Great Lakes. The first major sighting of the snake occurred when a group of travelers saw it sunbathing on a road. Now, the newspaper said that it was bigger than the entire width of the road, but they also said that the road was 600 feet wide, which I'm assuming is a typo. It was probably only 60 feet or 18 meters. Either way, it was seen multiple times by multiple reputable people. It only moved when the sun began to set, and the shade from nearby trees fell upon it. At the same time, a similar giant snake was being seen in nearby Point Pelee, Canada. A reporter speculated that the two towns would have a snake hunt and a measuring contest. Speaking of Canada, author John Warm spent years researching cryptids in Manitoba, and the giant snake was one of the earliest he heard about. One woman was driving down the road when she saw a large log blocking it. To her horror, she realized that it was actually a massive snake. She quickly drove off the road to avoid it. When people investigated the area later, they found a large imprint made by the reptile. It's important to note that the largest known snake in the region is the relatively small garter snake. Worms also talked to an elder who was hunting with a friend when they began hearing a strange sound in the wilderness. It was almost like a woman screaming, and the sound seemed to be following them. So they decided to look for it, as at the time they were bold young men. That's when they came across a massive snake with its jaws wide open, emitting the horrible noise. Needless to say, they turned around and sprinted out of there. Another story was told to him by an unfortunate fisherman named Donald. Don was trying to save some nets that had frozen into the lake. It had begun to thaw, so Donald went to collect his gear. That's when he spotted the head of a massive snake moving towards him in the water. He ran away, but when he returned, he saw the same snake again. This was apparently too much for Donald, who sold his fishing gear and quit. In the 1980s, 3 men went on a commercial fishing trip in Lake Winnipegosis. They ended up landing on an island and disembarking. That's when they saw something large coming down from a hill, moving through the tall grass. A large serpent similar to a python or anaconda then emerged, flicking its tongue out at the men. One of the men was so shocked he dropped a large pole he was carrying, and the snake darted away. The men then stayed on the boat for the rest of the trip, afraid that the snake would crawl aboard and eat them. Decades later, the men continued to avoid the island. Perhaps the most bizarre giant snake story was told to Worms by a farmer and his granddaughter. Apparently, the farmer had noticed that his calves were looking malnourished, so he decided to investigate. Then one day, he saw a giant snake drinking the milk from his cows. Tall tales of snakes drinking cow's milk were common in years past, and Worms heard multiple reports of this happening. One somewhat common feature of sightings Worms found were horns on the snakes. In one of these reports, a man named Lester Brass was cruising Swan Lake in his 22-foot or 7-meter long boat. That's when a snake even larger than his boat shot past him in the water. Brass noted that it had horns very similar in size and shape to a deer's. Another man claimed to have seen a giant snake with a singular large horn. Yet another man saw 2 9-foot or 2.7-meter long snakes with smaller horns entangled with each other in a ditch. He was able to observe them for about 10 minutes before they entered a river and swam off. Worms noted that many sightings of giant snakes occurred near water. A couple encounters with the snakes have occurred under the water as well. One group of kids were playing on the bottom of a lake, standing on what they felt was a scaly log. They went to get more kids, but when they returned to the spot, the log was gone. There were ripples in the water showing that something big had left. That's when they realized they had been standing on a giant snake. In Lake Winnipeg, 2 boys were swimming in a forbidden area, as large snakes had recently been seen there. One boy was in the water already, and the other was about to jump in. But then the kid in the lake felt something large slither by him underwater. So he sprinted home barefoot, and the other boy left with him. Another detail found in many stories are the snakes being extremely durable. They've been shot at, smacked with paddles, and run over by pickup trucks, and they seem to just shrug it off. One snake even encircled and crushed a canoe, although the people inside were able to escape. In 2001, Worms found a massive snake skin and had it DNA tested. It turned out to be a released boa constrictor, showing that perhaps at least some sightings were inspired by exotic pets. He also found massive tracks in the grass that seemed to belong to large, heavy snakes. Sometimes the grass in the trails was dead, which some locals speculated was because the snake secreted some kind of deadly substance. Worms himself saw a large serpent on the water from a pontoon boat he built a cabin on top of. In 2008, he was on the Fairford River when he and his crew spotted a large serpentine shape moving through the water. The visible length of it was about 15 feet or 5 meters. It then submerged before popping back up 2 more times. After that, it disappeared completely. Manitoba isn't the only place in Canada to be home to giant snake reports either. In 1826, about a dozen people in Montreal saw a giant snake coiled around a 30-foot tall tree. It was about the width of a water bucket, but its color wasn't described. Cows, sheep, and horses all went missing around the same time it was sighted. In another report, a group of men saw the animal slither into the woods to hide. Other stories of giant snakes were reported from Alberta and Saskatchewan. Back in the 1940s, 3 old women were picking berries on the Sweetgrass Reserve when they stopped to smoke their pipes. That's when they were startled by a giant snake as thick as a stovepipe. While they were able to get away, another woman fainted after encountering a giant snake around the same time. Luckily, she screamed the word snake before passing out, so people were able to rescue her. Worms also found giant snake sightings in the books of a Métis man named Louis Goulet. In 1883, Goulet was thrown from his horse after a large snake startled it. His partner was initially skeptical of Goulet's story, but the next day, he saw the massive serpent himself. Another time, Goulet was hunting a group of mountain sheep when he found one being swallowed by a giant snake. He shot and killed the snake, which was about 14 feet or 4 meters in length. A group of nearby natives then took the snake's body before he could get a proper measurement. Finally, we get to Central America and the Caribbean. One interesting story comes from a German man who was driving in a Jeep by the Honduras-Nicaragua border. He saw a large log ahead in the road, so he sent his associate to go move it. The young man came sprinting back soon after, saying that it wasn't a log at all, but a snake. The man ended the story with this ominous statement: "I've seen the most incredible snakes in this country during the past 20 years, and I can assure you, I know how to handle a gun. But that day, I left the revolver where it was. I just stepped on the gas and drove off." Another sighting comes from Herman Speaker, an American soldier charged with guarding the Panama Canal. He was transporting cases of milk when he ran over a massive snake in the road. He said the snake was 32 feet or 10 meters in length, though it's not clear if he measured it or just estimated the size. The final story comes from the island of Trinidad. In 1889, there was a spree of animals going missing. At first it was small animals, then larger ones like horses, and then children. One mother who lost her child was still grieving when she saw a giant snake carry off another child. Sentries were posted to try and catch the serpent, but all they found were tracks leading to the water. It was speculated that the snake was a remnant of a thought-extinct species of large anaconda that once roamed the island. The issue got so bad that a request to the capital for aid was sent. An armed group of men set out to try and track down the snake and eliminate it. Eventually, they followed it to a cave in the mountains. Shortly after entering the cave, a massive snake reared out of a pool of water. It took 2 volleys of bullets by the men to finally bring it down. The giant snake had a dark back, yellow underbelly, and an insane 47-foot or 14-meter total length. The skin was allegedly preserved somewhere in Trinidad's capital, but its present location is unknown. This brings us to what sizes snakes can actually reach in North America. The eastern indigo snake of the United States is fairly large, with recorded lengths of 9 feet or 2.8 meters. The gray rat snake of Canada only reaches 6.5 feet or 2 meters. The boa imperator of Central America can reach a length of about 12 feet or 3.7 meters. Even acknowledging that people can misjudge the size of animals in the wild, the giant snake sightings in this video are far larger than these snakes. So what other explanations could there be besides a giant new species of snake? I think a number of these sightings could be simple hoaxes. If you want to scare people for a joke, telling them there's a giant snake is a great way to do it. Old newspapers, where many cryptid snake stories were reported, are also full of fake stories written for fun. Like Mr. Worms discovered, there is also the possibility of escaped exotic snakes. Invasive snake species are a big issue in the United States, with many being escapees from private collections. One article from the 1980s estimates that over 1 million reptiles came into the United States through the port of Miami alone. Now, a lot of sightings came prior to the 1980s, but exotic snakes were still being brought into the US before, just in smaller numbers. For example, the giant snake hoax in Green Bay I discussed earlier took place in the 1930s. There's also the slight possibility that a large anaconda from South America crossed into Central America or even the United States. The Panama Canal wasn't completed until the early 1900s after all. Maximum size estimates range a ton for anacondas, but 6 meters or 20 feet is a size most people can agree on. The question is, do you think these sightings were all hoaxes or misidentifications, or is there a giant undiscovered species of snake in North America? Let me know what you think down below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider sharing it with someone else, liking, and subscribing. Big shoutout to Chad Arment, Carl Schuker, John Warms, and Bamias. If you want even more giant snake stories, check out Arment's book Boss Snakes and John Warms' book Strange Creatures Seldom Seen. Also make sure to check out the list of artists I put in the description of my video if you want to see even more great cryptid art. Another huge shoutout to my Patreons Gerhard, Timothy, Wild World, Macindude, Jason Cook, Ben, and John R. If you'd like to support me on Patreon and get input into future videos, a link will be below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one.